Hello everyone, my name is Polina Gavarushina. I hold an MLit Art History degree from the University of Glasgow. I currently work at New Jerusalem Museum of Arts as a researcher, lecturer, and an assistant to museum collection manager. I'm here to present my postgraduate dissertation research on self-portraits by female Renaissance artists. So let's start. Visual art is usually a reflection of the societies in which they are produced. The art of the Renaissance is an outstanding example of that. Many Renaissance oeuvres depicts an elaborated female image, providing unique and valuable sources of knowledge on contemporary women of that time. However, some things remain untold. Women were usually put on a pedestal, trapped in beauty ideals and roles prescribed to them by the patriarchal society. In order to further study about early modern women, I focused on the depiction of femininity under the brushstrokes of female painters. The analysis was based on the self-portraits by three Italian artists, Sophonisba Anguissola, Lavinia Fontana, and Artemisia Gentileschi. In the established courtly fashion of the time, self-portraits were usually gifted to potential patrons in the expectation of receiving favor or commission in return. Artists would use self-portraits to construct and manipulate their image the way they wished to be seen by Renaissance audience and patrons in particular. The femininity of the artists would define their shared experiences during the Renaissance, a period dominated by misogynistic and patriarchal cultural norms. For an artist to be successful during that time, it was essential to be educated in classical antiquity, anatomy, philosophy, and mathematics. Yet gender norms of the period usually excluded women from education, instead assigning them with roles of wives and mothers. Most commonly, female artists were daughters of painters, for instance, Fontana and Gentileschi. Anguissola represents a rare example of a noble woman who studied visual art with a teacher arranged by her father. Although a considerable amount of research has been undertaken on each of the artists, an in-depth comparative analysis of their self-portraits establishes similarities in the way women represent themselves, further outlining the significance of their shared femininity during the Renaissance. My objective was to investigate to what extent the artists' shared gender influenced the way they would represent themselves. My research questions included: how does the wider, deeply sexist context of the Renaissance affect the way women represent themselves? This context was further opposed to the artists' identities. Women differ from one another, so I studied how does their own individuality determine the way they represent things, considering their education, slightly different times of living, varied geographical positions, and social statuses. During the Renaissance, it was unusual for a female to be an artist, yet Anguissola, Fontana, and Gentileschi intentionally depict themselves in the process of painting, pointing out their profession. In a self-portrait at an easel, Anguissola represents herself adding the last touches to an artwork of the Virgin and Child. She includes common artistic tools such as easel, palette, brush, and maul stick. Significantly, Anguissola was one of the first artists to depict herself with artistic instruments. Previously, painters would represent themselves as gentlemen rather than artisans, because the profession was associated with manual labor and craftsmanship. However, during the Renaissance, the status of the artist was elevated, resulting in intellectual recognition and fame. Even though Renaissance self-portraiture accounts for examples of male artists representing themselves with professional instruments, one of the earliest is Titian's self-portrait. On the right, we can see its reproduction. Female artists are recorded to have referenced their artistic background more often. This may be explained by the fact that men didn't have to force the Renaissance public to see them as artists, since the profession was already associated with males at the time. In contrast, women had to pronounce themselves as artists, since the profession was unusual for females in early modern period. Fontana's self-portrait in the studio continues the tradition of highlighting her profession as an artist. She's sitting at a desk with a stylus in her right hand, preparing a paper for drawing. She's surrounded by an extensive collection of classical casts and statuettes, the references to both her artistic profession and scholarly pursuits. Since women did not have access to nude models, their learning of human anatomy partly depended on the use of plaster casts, which would not replace the study from nudes. Thus, it is possible that Fontana comments on the problem of women's exclusion from proper artistic education during the Renaissance. Fontana's table displays the statues of Mercury and Venus. During the period, Mercury symbolized power and mental faculty, while Venus was associated with emotions and beauty. Significantly, Mercury occupies the central space within the table, possibly indicating the prevalent importance of knowledge and scholarship to Fontana's identity. She was well educated and held a doctorate of letters from the University of Bologna. Certain scholars, including Baldassare Castiglione and Leon Battista Alberti, acknowledged the importance of women's education. However, they tended to associate it with an opportunity for women to be better companions for their husbands and for making better impressions during courtly receptions. Nevertheless, some women, including Fontana, used education for their personal ambitions. In her self-portrait as the allegory of painting, or La Pittura, Gentileschi identifies with visual arts. La Pittura was described by Cesare Ripa as a female engaged in the act of painting, with a pendant mask on a golden chain, a symbol of imitation, unruly locks of hair indicating the artist's divine frenziness, and garments with changing colors, alluding to the painter's coloristic skills. The left sleeve of Gentileschi's dress shines in the different shades of green, indicating her virtuoso technique of color handling, highlighted by Alessandro da Marona as the artist's particular speciality. Gentileschi represents herself in a moment of artistic inspiration, about to apply paint into an empty canvas. The depiction of artistic inspiration is rare in Renaissance self-portraiture. Furthermore, by indicating her ability to create, Gentileschi proves wrong the Aristotelian dictum about male procreation. The female always provides the material, the male provides that which fashions the material into shape. Significantly, all three females frequently cite male qualities in their self-portraits. For instance, Anguissola depicts herself in black simple attire, referencing a fashion style popular among noblemen. Fontana explicitly cites her scholarship, mainly associated with males at the time. Gentileschi depicts creative inspiration, considered a male prerogative during the Renaissance. Thus, these female painters use cross-gendered representations referencing the male qualities to pronounce themselves as artists, the faculty that was considered conventionally masculine at the time. Castiglione further outlines this custom by suggesting that women wished to be perceived as men, I quote, in order to have liberty and to escape that dominion of them, which man has arrogated to himself by his own authority. The different years in which the artists lived has affected their work. For instance, Anguissola was one of the pioneering female painters. She experienced more restrictions in terms of artistic training and practicing in comparison to her subsequent female colleagues. For instance, Anguissola never attended art institutions and only worked in the genre of portraiture, considered suitable for females at the time. Significantly, the later years of living allowed both Fontana and Gentileschi to attend art institutions. Fontana studied at Accademia di San Luca and Gentileschi at Accademia del Disegno. Having a proper artistic education enabled the artists to extend their work beyond the genre of portraiture. The two females executed history paintings and in some included themselves. Both women identified with biblical hero Judith, who saved the people of Israel by killing an Assyrian general Holofernes. The character of Judith would proclaim female power and dominance over men, which might explain her popularity among women artists. Babette Bon claims that Fontana was the first female artist to include herself in a history painting. She depicts herself as Judith, holding the heavy sword at Holofernes' head without a visible effort, indicating her strength. This rather mighty representation is inserted with the allure of her rather revealing dress, adding a slight presence of erotica. Rona Gaffan further claims that the erotically charged paintings would give the artist control over the viewer's sensations and emotions. The prevalent audience of history paintings were men, hence, this case exemplifies a woman artist dominating male viewers, which would reverse the period's traditional distribution of gender roles. Gentileschi's identification with Judith is significant by her violent power. This painting has been widely interpreted as the artist's experience of rape and her consequent desire to revenge on Agostino Tassi, the man who assaulted her. However, interpreting the painting purely in terms of her autobiography would be an oversimplification. Gentileschi's choice to depict the climax of the story when Judith is slaying Holofernes is inspired by Caravaggio's earlier painting on the same topic. One could trace Gentileschi's influence by Caravaggesque style, the use of chiaroscuro, the strong contrast of light and dark that increases the horror of the scene. Yet Gentileschi's representation of Judith is revolutionary in its violence. Look at her determination to kill Holofernes. Contextually, a woman committing a murder was perceived with shock in 17th century society, as most crimes in Renaissance Europe were committed by men. The painters' varied geographical positions would further influence their art. Anguissola started her artistic career in the city of Cremona, that was under Spanish control at the time. It is possible that in her Cremonese self-portraits dating between 1554 and 1561, this is one of them, She intentionally represented herself in a rigid black garments associated with the mode of Spanish courts. During the 16th century, the black color dominated Spanish fashion, indicating the wearer's austerity and power. Federico Fregoso, an Italian nobleman, identified the color as the most appealing in clothing. I quote, "Black is more suitable for garments than any other color is. I would have our courtiers' dress display that sobriety which the Spanish nation greatly affect." Anguissola's success in identifying herself with the Spanish court fashion is confirmed by the fact that in 1559 she was appointed as a court painter of Philip II, the King of Spain. Fontana was mostly based in the city of Bologna, famous for its textile production during the 16th and 17th centuries. Her Bolognese self-portraits indicate the artist's exceptional skills in fabrics depiction, thus promoting Fontana to her main clientele, Bolognese noblewomen who would have owned a significant amount of luxury clothes. The fact that Gentileschi mainly worked in the cities of Rome and Florence also influenced her art. Her painting of Judith accounts for a meticulously constructed composition, suggesting her use of preliminary drawings, a common practice among Central Italy artists, including Gentileschi. In conclusion, the femininity of this three Italian artists connect them together because it would determine their professional and personal experiences defined by the patriarchal and sexist context of the time. Anguissola, Fontana, and Gentileschi successfully balanced between satisfying the societal expectations of them while also fulfilling their artistic pursuits. And while their shared femininity imposed relatively similar limitations to their training and practicing, their self-depictions also reflect the women's unique identities and styles.